Morris, you're watching Bosun Dan Bushcraft, and today we're going to be taking a look at axe care, or more specifically what I do to maintain my lovely little woodland friend Freya, that anyone who watches any of my videos will have seen quite a few times before. Usually what I'll do is, any time that I have taken this thing out, I will give it a bit of sharpening and a bit of maintenance. Pretty much one of the first things I do when I get back from the woods or any relevant adventure, just to make sure that it doesn't go all rusty and gammy and keeps it all in good shape. The first things I tend to do is simply sharpen it and get it nice and sharp before I worry about anything else, because every time you use it, it will take the edge down by a little bit. And as I've mentioned many times before, I like to keep this thing sharp enough so as it is able to shave your leg. It's just one of the things I like to do. Now, this axe of mine has a double bevel edge. So you've got this lovely wide pattern on the first bevel on the blade there, where I've literally just shaped the cheeks of the axe so that it's a bit flatter to make it more easy to give you that cutting face. You can see it quite clearly on both sides there. And then after that is the actual second bevel, which is your actual business end, the cutting end there. I did actually use this, I think probably about a week ago now, was when I last took it out, and I didn't actually resharpen it, I just gave it a polish. So you can see there's a couple of pretty, well, that's a pretty drastic implement. This is a fairly standard sharpening stone, aside from this is quite heavy on the ceramic side. It's got a lot of ceramic in it, which is actually, this is, as a stone, is really good. I got this from a shop in Leek called Yorkshire Trading Company. It was only like £1.50. It's actually a really good stone. It's very rare that I would ever need to use this side, the rougher side, particularly on a blade such as this that gets used a lot and gets maintained a lot. Should it require anything even quite that extreme, I'm on the ceramic side there. To be quite honest with you though, it's very rare that I even need to use the smoother ceramic side on such a stone with my axe Freya like this. More than anything, all I ever need to do, because I maintain it so often and literally every time I've used it I will maintain it, I tend to only ever really need to use this, my little Fulkniven DC3 ceramic sharpening stone. It's very rare that this ever needs any drastic work, unless I've missed a log and clipped a rock or something like that and put a dink in it, in which case obviously then it is going to need a bit more of a tickle. But generally with this one, because I do it so often, it doesn't really take all that much to put it back to fine working order and shaving order, to be quite honest with you. So with any double bevel blade, I know that there's a lot of different grinds out there. They all have there's so many different types, and a lot of people have got their own preference. I personally just like the old double bevel. It just keeps it so much more simple. It makes it a lot quicker and easier to sharpen, in my opinion. I'm sure a lot of people have different opinions, but with the double bevel, any time that you're going to do sharpening work on the final cut face there, it is always worth, before you do that, polishing some off on the first bevel edge there, because if you don't, every time that you do, I mean, don't get me wrong, I can literally bring this thing back from the woods, give me 10 strokes per side on the strop, and she'll be back up to full cutting edge again. The problem is, the more that you do that, eventually what is going to happen is that second bevel, which is where your actual sharp is slowly getting fatter and fatter and fatter as you're polishing bits off it, which means at some point you're going to find yourself having to do quite a lot of rubbing away to get it back. It's far easier in the long run to take it down at the same time. So anytime that I am going to sharpen this thing, or sharpen the final cutting edge, always do some polishing work on that first bevel first. Now, depending on how well maintained and sharpened your axes are, you might need to go on to something a bit rougher and a bit harder to start with, but as aforementioned, I have already done all of this years ago and I just keep it going. So with just this little one, what I'll do is just set it to the angle of the first bevel. Now, particularly with that first bevel, what I like to do is go in runs of 50 and just follow that curve all the way down. Now, you can see that as I'm doing this, I am literally I'm lining it to that first bevel. So the actual cut face is not yet touching the stone at all as I do it. And I'm following that curve round. And like I said, this is a delicate stone. It doesn't take much metal off, but you can probably already see from just those few strokes there that it has left a mark on it. It shows you you're doing something. So what I would do for the most part, just to save a bit of time really, is I would do 50 strokes per side, call it good at that, and then move on to the second bevel. So that's a quick polish taken off on the first bevel there. Like I say, if you've got a brand new fresh axe, unless you've paid a lot of money for it, the chances are that the cheeks on it are going to be quite fat and very poorly ground. In my experience, when it comes to axes, if you're spending a lot of money on a hatchet or an axe, the money that you spend is going to go into the grind quality more than anything. So spending more money on an axe does not equate to getting better steel or anything like that. It's usually the time that's been spent grinding the shape in. So there's nothing wrong with the cheaper axe. If you're prepared to put the work in, you'll turn it into it'll cut just as well. For example, the head that this one is made out of cost me a tenner some years ago. It wasn't an expensive one, but then the big open scoff one that we've used in other videos, I actually got very lucky with that. I found that for about £4 on a car boot sale. I had to put some work into it because it was very rusty, but once I'd cleaned it up, you could see why open scoff are expensive. The grind quality on it is far better and far more uniform. So if your axe is much rougher, then you will have to spend obviously a lot more time taking these big curvy shapes into it. But with that first bevel having that little bit of attention, we're now going to move on to the second bevel, the actual cutting face on the front of it. Now with this one, it never takes much because, like I say, it's very well maintained. And although I always, with the cheeks, I'll always take off on the first bevel, I will always polish that a lot more than I will the second one. It just makes sense in the long run, as that's going to be the hardest one to thin back out if you let it get thick. Now it's the same thing again really, but all I'm going to do is, well, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use it to cut into the stone with the cut face, because really what I'm doing is just polishing a thin layer of metal off, and I'm kind of creating a burr in a sense, so you'll feel it get a little more scratchy on your finger after you've done it. So I'll probably just do this in runs of like 10, again making sure that I'm getting the whole blade. You have to curve your hand around it as you go. I'll probably just give it 10 per side though on this, and this time I'm right on the cut face as if I'm shaving the stone. So it's far more of an extreme angle. And here we go again. I don't know if you can quite see that if I get the light on it, but you can just see there is the extra little shine on the edge as opposed to that first bevel. Now you can see there's a little nick in it right there. I could polish that out. I could. I'm not going to though, because really that'll polish itself out over time. It's such a small little nick, it doesn't really make that much difference. And if I was to obsessively polish out every time you do get a tiny nick like that, you're just reducing the life of it so much, so quickly. There really is no point. Straight onto a 10 on the other side. Go. And that is really all it needs for the cutting strokes. So after that, what I would do, and like I say, this is all based on one that's maintained a lot. After that, all I'm going to do is I'm going to hone the blade using the same stone. Now when you're honing is basically backstroking as opposed to cutting in. Really what you're going to do with that is you're going to use decreasing pressure, and as a rule of thumb with this, the sharper that the blade is to start, the less pressure that you're going to need to put on that as you're honing it out. Because honing, you're literally just adding a really fine polishing layer to the actual cutting edge as you're doing it. So again, starting on one side. With this as well, this is where it gets to, everything else usually I'll do it as I'll count. I'll have a number that I'll go, so it'll be so many there, so many there. With honing, this is where the sound starts to come in, and a bit later on when we use the strop I'll explain this a bit better. But it'll make a noise. It makes that lovely shh noise. Now what you want is somewhere in between a heavy noise and silence. And what I mean by that is, when you start, if it's like really loud scratchy noise, that means obviously there's a lot of polishing what's doing. The quieter it's getting is obviously improving the polish of that edge. But what you don't want to do is ever take it to the point of utter silence, particularly with the strop. What that would mean realistically, or at least in my experience, is you've got too far and you've polished your edge off, basically. With an axe you will always tend to have one side makes more of a noise than the other. That's where you get that burr that I was on about, because to get it razor, really what you're doing is polishing a very fine burr on the edge of it, even with some knives as well. And when you get that utter silence as you're honing it down the stone, that's pretty much where you've removed that and you've gone the opposite way and you've started to make it blunt again. So I'll just start nice and gentle and just, and you can hear that's making a good solid grinding noise. Well, you might be able to hear it. A car has just appeared just at the moment that I do that. So it's a good solid. I'm really using very light pressure here. Right, the noise is starting to change a bit, so now I'm going to go to the other side, and if you can see in the sun, it's so hard to know what you can and can't see, but you can just see that second edge getting really nice and polished. Right, so we'll go on to the other edge now, the other side, same again, listening to the noise. So what I want is to hear that friction noise reduce a little, but I don't want it to stop. I don't want it to completely go away. So at this point now, I'm really hearing that note change. Yeah, that's got a bite to it. So I'm going to go back to the first side again, and this time I am barely even using the pressure of the weight of the axe head itself. Now, knowing this axe as well as I do by note, that is going to be pretty much shave ready. A few more little tickles and that's going to start to shave. So you'll have to excuse this, but this is genuinely how I test my axe when I've been sharpening it. Bit of dodgy sock in the way there. By this point it should be getting ready to start to shave, and it does get shave sharp off that little stone. So let's look. There we go. So you can see it is starting to take the hairs off. Now, from this point, when it just starts to shave, I could continue to take it sharper by continuing honing, ever decreasing the pressure on it, yeah? Just basically making it lighter as I do the strokes, and that would continue getting it sharper still. But there is an easier and quicker way, and a less sacrificial way from this point. I mean, for the longest time, I did continue to do that. And just hone more gentle, more gentle, more gentle, and get the edge better like that. But there's a quicker, less wasteful way, because obviously the rougher the medium you're using, the more metal you're technically removing, even though with this little stone it's really slim amounts. I like to this point go straight to the strop. Now a strop doesn't really so much remove metal as polish the metal. Now obviously over time, yeah, some metal is removed, but generally all it's actually doing is polishing that final edge, removing all those fine lines that have been left in it by the grit of the stone, and making it that sort of mirror shine edge that just makes it super sharp. So from this point we'll go straight on to the strop. Oh, GoPro. A good strop shouldn't really cost you much money, to be honest with you. They're not expensive. I think this one I use was literally about a tenner. It's really not that expensive. It's made by a strop makers called Sharpie. You'll find them all over eBay. Now, first mistake a lot of people make with a strop is they'll just use the untreated leather, as it comes just a nice clean leather sheet, and they'll just use it completely untreated. You can see this one looks a bit grubby. That grubbiness is not dirt from being used, having blades rubbed about it. That is a type of wax. This type of wax, this is I don't know if it's aluminium oxide wax or some form of oxide wax. Basically, it's a wax that contains very fine metal particles and fragments in it that does the polishing for you. Well, I say metal, it's obviously the oxidation of metal, hence the term oxide. So that stuff's what really does the work along with the leather. Now, a good thin layer of this when you're using it, you don't have to do it every time, but a good thin layer of that makes it work a lot more efficiently. Yes, the naked leather will do it, but with the wax on it, it is 10 times better. Now, stropping is another one of those things where people tend to make mistakes. One of the biggest sins is keeping the strop really sloppy as you're using it. The problem with that is the strop tends to bend like you can see it doing now, and it'll roll over your edge. And as it rolls over your edge, it's polishing that edge back off again for you. It's not actually sharpening it at that point, it's polishing it back round. And you don't want it round, you've just spent all that time making it sharp and shiny. Now, I hope this is going to come through the camera with the noise, because just like the honing, the noise is crucial. You need to be able to hear. With this, you're sharpening with your ears, not your eyes. Okay. Now, with a strop, you always hone, you always backstroke. You are never going to cut upwards. If you do, you're just going to slice through your strop. That is #1 strop death. Nobody is immune to that. You can see there's a nick out of mine here and there. It happens to everybody. We all inevitably at some point cut a strop through. With thinner blades, this axe isn't really appropriate, but with thinner blades, you'll always have this fluffy layer, usually with a strop. That's for warming the edge up. It apparently improves the polish. It certainly makes a difference with a straight razor. With an axe, I never personally bother. What I do, though, is I lock it over my finger at the bottom to try and get it as flat as I can. Pull pressure into it. Yeah, you don't have to go nuts. You're not trying to rip it off the wall, but pull pressure into it to keep it straight. Find that bite edge, and you're listening for the noise. Now, as I said earlier about the burr that you're polishing, one side is going to make less noise than another, and this probably really isn't coming through the camera. I'm going to bring you in really close. You'll probably be too close that you can't see anything, but hopefully you can hear it. So hopefully this is going to come through the microphone and you can hear it. You can just hear that very fine grind noise, and that's what you want. You don't want it to get to the point of absolute silence. You hear that? Now the burr's on this side, and you can hear much more of a Now really, if you're doing it right and you've got it sharp enough in the first place, it shouldn't take too many passes to get it to that perfect sharp that you want. I'll just put you a bit further away now. We're getting a bit so his eyes are going square watching it. So we'll just have a look at that, and you can see the shine on the edge and where there's a bit of the wax come off on the edge. So that's where, when you do get waxy like that, that's where I would use the polishing edge there and just give it that clean. If you're doing it right, it shouldn't take too many passes to really improve that result. So let me have a look. Yeah, that is just instantly taking hair. So I'm just going to give it 2 or 3 more good passes up the straw. You see, when they get absolutely razor sharp, they don't feel sharp until you slip a little bit and then boom. But you do the old fingernail grip test, it literally won't move down your fingernail. It doesn't slide in any way. We'll give you the old leg air test. Apologies for the dodgy tattoo. I got that years ago when we won Rugby World Cup back in Johnny Wilkinson's days. So let's have a look. Go away, little fly. Yeah, look at that. So nice ball patch on my leg there. A nice pile of hair on the blade. So that, for Bosun Dan, is sharp enough. On to the next phase. So to keep her all bright and shiny, I like to use a good old traditional product called Autosol. Anyone who's got old vehicles or vehicles with chrome on them, motorcycles, things like that, will know about Autosol. Excellent for polishing anything shiny, including silvers, golds, anything like that. Great for knife, blades and stuff like that. There's another really brilliant reason why I like to use this as well. I have found that there is nothing out there that shifts sap off a blade better than this stuff. I have tried all sorts of polishes, T-cut and stuff like that, but the old Autosol just rips pine sap and stuff like that. It just takes it completely off your blade. So what I'll do is just give it both sides a jolly good working over with the old Autosol. And like I say, I do this every time I've used her. Some days she'll be out with me 2 or 3 days in a row. What I'll do in the meantime then, to stop it from rusting, is I'll carry a little pot of beeswax. I'll just give it a good old jolly rubbing with the towel to make sure it's dry, and then just rub over it with beeswax. Now, I appreciate that some people, depending on how much you use or rely on your axes, you might think that this is a bit silly and a bit extreme. And I can forgive you for that. I don't blame you for that. I know there's a lot of people who just like to carry a saw, and what they like to do is just use axes for actually splitting the logs and stuff, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not suggesting everybody should be as obsessive over an axe as I am, but I use this one as my #1 tool. I do have plenty of other things, and I always carry a folding saw, but I tend mostly, just to keep kit down, I tend to rely on a good old Swiss Army knife, because I bloody love the Swiss Army knives, an old Freya here. And as such, I like to keep her in just absolute pristine condition. The back end, the hammer, I know so many people go, it's not a hammer. Yeah, it is. I always give that just a quick whittle over as well, just to make sure it's not getting too orange. You see, that's a rusty patch there, where some water's landed on it at some point, and you can see the Autosol does quite a quick job of just ripping that down straight away. Lovely. Lovely. So after I've given it a good rub down with Autosol, I'm not going to buff it off yet, I'm not going to polish it up proper yet or clean it up, because what I do now, birch oil. This birch oil is brilliant. If there's one of my videos where I make it earlier on in this year, and I've got the 2 types in here. I've got the watery stuff, the clear stuff on the top, and then the good thick oily stuff at the bottom. Now this stuff is brilliant for treating and waterproofing wood and keeping it supple. It also remains slightly sticky on the wood, which means you're very less likely to get it slip out of your hand when you're using it. So I get into my jar there, and I get the real good sludgy stuff out of the bottom. This is the point where it gets a bit like kiddies' playtime at school, because you want to get all gooey and messy. And I like to get it all into your palm there. A good dose of it in that palm. Lovely. So your palms are covered in it. Oh, and the smell of it. And then literally just rub the living devil out of the whole axe handle. At the same time as you're rubbing it in, really what you're doing is you're actually warming the wood up as well. And that will to at least a degree, sort of open up the pores of the wood and let it soak. Let it soak right in, nice and neatly. A little splat on my finger for up here where it's had little knocks and little bangs, and where it literally just wants a little more attention, forcing it into where it's clonked on logs and things. And obviously into the spaces where I've carved runes and things into it, because those are places where water will get in and start causing havoc. There are a few things in the world when it comes to liquids, or what's technically a solvent, there are a few things more damaging, weirdly, than fresh water. Something interesting I found out the other day. I was talking to, just randomly, there was a chappie at work and he does repairs on boats. He works particularly on remade tall sail ships, and he said, never mind below the waterline where the seawater is, what really does damage to a wooden ship is actually the fresh water, the rainwater getting in at it from above. You wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought the salt water would have been the dangerous part, but apparently the salt water is kind of the constant. The actual soaking in action of the fresh water, soaking in and drying and doing all that, does the damage. Quite bizarre. So water can be very damaging stuff. There we are. It smells gorgeous. And obviously, like I say, it always maintains this stuff a slight tackiness to it, so it's very unlikely you're going to lose your grip. Birch oil, brilliant for a million things. It's even good for, say, if you've got a rip in a basher sheet or a tent canvas and you've just stitched it back up, a good dose of that gooey stuff rubbed over it waterproofs it. You ain't going to let no water through. Right. So, now that the handle's all taken care of and the thing's razor sharp, I'm going to rub off all of where the autosol was. Make sure you can see it. Oh yeah, I think we're in. So I've said before with this GoPro, the little screen on the front is rubbish. Really, there's no point it being there because it doesn't show you the full picture. So you never know when you're looking at what is and isn't. I have to keep running around the back. Anyway, buff all that autosol off where you've given it a jolly good old polish. Getting as much of it off as you can. Autosol is quite good because if you leave it to dry on metal, it stays really quite powdery and it rubs off nice and easily. If you take something like tea cut, which is good for paint, but if you let tea cut dry on something, my word, it doesn't want to come. Particularly paint, if you're ever polishing a car with it, if you let it dry on that paint, it won't come off. You have to use more tea cut to get it off, kind of not really helping the issue there. And there she goes, all bright and shiny, as we like. Now, obviously, if you're storing it for any length of time, you don't want ambient air getting all over that, what you've just done. So I would use, personally, this is, it's furniture polish. It's just a type of beeswax. It's got natural pine, turpentine and beeswax in it. Gorgeous. Don't use linseed oils and things like that on the actual blade. They dry to an almost plasticized layer and they'll just impede you later on. They're great for doing other things with, but good for treating the handle itself with. Don't use them on the steel though, because it just goes all gooey and sets into like I don't know how you'd describe it, like sugar really. So just get a bit of that, a good, jolly good liberal rubbing over of it. Obviously, be very careful when you get into your now razor sharp cutting face, because particularly with the beeswax there to act as a lubricant, it's going to slide through your finger like you wouldn't believe. Lovely. Now, usually I'll just let that sit for a moment or two. I'll let it almost harden a little bit. It doesn't harden much because it's got turpentine in it. It keeps it permanently soft, which is good because it means you can get it anywhere. It'll just soak in all over it. And pine and turpentine. It really doesn't matter if that gets on the wooden handle. It's only going to help with the waterproofing nature of it. But Once you've done that, again, just buff it off. You've now got a razor sharp, shiny, and relatively water sealed axe. Like that. And actually the wax weirdly kind of dulls the shine a little bit, but that's probably because I haven't clean polished it off. I've left it on a little thick just to make sure I've got that protective layer. The final thing I do before I chuck her back on the axe rack in there and tuck her up for bed is I add oil to the top of the wedge here. Keeps it swell. Now obviously in dry days, dry months, or if you keep your axe inside, they will shrink up and your axe head will work its way loose. You can soak them in water in a pinch. Again, remembering though that fresh water is quite aggressive where wood's concerned. It's not something I would like to do. It's great to do if you find yourself in the woods and your axe shaft has dried out and the head's worked loose and is jiggling about, then great, yeah, dunk it in a puddle for 5-10 minutes. It'll get you through the day. What I use is oil. Any form of oil. You can use cooking oil, kitchen oil, olive oil. What I'm using is engine oil, just mineral engine oil. It soaks into the wood, it swells the wood up, it stops it from shrinking completely. Because it's oil and not water, it doesn't evaporate, so it lasts a heck of a lot longer. And also, you don't get that sort of damage that you do. Oil doesn't rot wood. If the wood soaked in oil isn't going to rot. And it doesn't take long where you see it soaking in. Now you don't have to go absolutely mad at this. I'm not suggesting you soak gallons and gallons of it into it so that it swells up like a wounded thumb or something. But just a few splats on it every so often will keep that wood nice and swollen and inflated and stop it from shrinking to nothing and slipping, basically becoming loose. Because obviously the second that the axe head becomes loose and you're still swinging it about, that's when you're going to be doing damage to the eyelet. Well, the shaft, the eyelet of the axe will be fine, but that's when you're going to do damage to the shaft at the top, and by and by it's going to mean that you're ending up replacing it. And you don't want to be replacing them all the time. It's a nuisance. Naturally, with any timber handled tool, eventually you're going to have to replace it. Freya has had about 4 axe shafts in the time that I have had it. This one has lasted the longest. This one is made out of beech. I didn't realise beech was such a resilient wood when it comes to tool handles. It really is though. I tried a couple of times to make them from oak. They always ended up cracking. When oak seasons and dries, it actually becomes quite brittle, particularly when you're using something quite delicate and thin. This isn't a big heavy axe shaft, it's quite a delicate thing. So the oak used to crack quite regularly, and that's why I switched to beech out of an experiment. It worked and it lasted a hell of a lot longer. So that is done now. That is ready to go and hang up on the axe rack in the background there, where she lives, next to her twin sister and all the other cutting implements that I possess. It is amazing how much time I can spend getting, like, just polishing and messing about with axes. As soon as I see there's a mark on them or a bit of rust coming, I'm at it. It's worth it for me. I like them to look clean. It's just the way it is. So that is pretty much all there is to maintaining your axe, or at least that's all there is to how I maintain my axe for the woods. Your little bushcraft friend. Where would we be without them? And there'll be lots of people screaming there going, no, knives! Well, whatever it is you use, the same rules would apply with a knife. Sharpening it, keeping it clean, just generally looking after it, yeah? And particularly if you've got a knife like my little Falkner 80, where again it's a wooden handle, the birch oil keeps it supple, keeps it nourished, stops it cracking, just generally looks after it, keeps it waterproof. So everything that you've seen today is pretty much going to work right for every cutting tool, really. And that's pretty much all I need to waffle about for this this wonderful video about axe maintenance. As always, guys, get yourselves out there, get bushcrafting, get sharpening and polishing things. Be safe, get having fun. Please do subscribe if you're new here. It always makes a difference to anyone on YouTube. It helps us, it helps get the videos out to more people. it's just one of the, you know, it's just helpful. It makes sure that more people can see it and gets us out there a bit more. And you know, the more popular a video becomes, the easier it gets to then go and produce other ones and stuff. But it's just a quick one for this week. I've got something planned for later on this week, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm not going to tell you about that. You can wait for that one. But other than that, guys, that is all that Bosun Dan needs to waffle about, and I shall see you all very soon on the next one.